Hey, welcome to the Votary Podcast. We're a team of filmmakers based in New England who are passionate about storytelling. We talk about the impact that stories have in every part of our lives, from business to culture and everything in between. Thanks for joining us.
Is this in the frame? You got this? Welcome to the book.
It's a very special podcast episode featuring Jed's book.
This is Jed's book,
Tell us about yourself.
and it's done. We got Jed's book here in the flesh.
Wow.
We talked about it. We've been talking about it for a while, but
It's not real until you hold it in your hands.
it's done.
There it is. It's done, folks. It's available on Amazon. Check the show notes.
And we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about the book a little bit. We're going to interview the author in this episode 26 of the Votary Podcast.
Did you finish it?
Nope, I'm 3/4 of the way through. So I don't know if everyone lives at the end or how it ends. But
It's a shocker. It sets up the sequel real nice.
I don't want to tell you that there's a twist because then you'll be expecting the twist.
Right.
And that's kind of giving something away.
yeah,
Yeah, there's no twist.
And then
The twist is...
wait until you get to the twist. Now he just reverse twisted you.
yeah.
He just untwisted the twist.
That's like that trailer that gives you no information, but you still want to watch it.
Nothing that you guys have said is gonna change my experience at all. Just gonna finish the book.
Let's read the final word of the book for everyone.
It
World.
world. Ooh, that's a great ending word.
And it's actually world exclamation
What's
point.
What's the first word of the book?
All.
All world.
Now you know
All
the first word,
circles.
the alpha and the omega.
Wow,
All.
that's
world.
meaningful. Was that on purpose?
No, it wasn't, but I just thought of that right then.
That on purpose. As long as I start with all and end with world, there's just words in the middle.
That's what he had. He's like, oh,
It's an all-world sandwich, and
I'll,
it's just
I'll bridge the gap. I'll connect the dots eventually.
Should I do a live reading of the whole thing? I feel
No.
like Andy Kaufman right now. I want to do an Andy Kaufman thing where I just read it front to back in this podcast. That would be a 2-for-1.
And
Like,
we're
we'll
just
have the
a s-
audiobook and then...
it's like 7 p.m. Everyone's just like
Yeah, this is
drunk. Just like,
2 birds. We're gonna have a podcast and the recording of the audiobook at the end of this.
this is how it feels being this far over, huh? This is normally your seat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're not bracketed by another.
What do you think, Jono?
It is a little strange turning back and forth in that seat, I will say.
I already made that joke earlier, and I was like, now that I made the joke, I'm gonna have to make the joke again on the podcast. But I gotta laugh.
Well, I didn't hear it, so it worked.
Yeah,
It was like fresh
it
for me.
worked.
Okay, let's jump in.
Oh,
I have a question.
I'm going to hold it like this the whole time.
I have a question. What is this?
we need a little stand here.
What is this book? Because we talked about it on a former podcast, but let's pretend no one listening now will listen to that one.
All right.
What is this book? Why'd you write it? What led up to the writing of
So
it?
many questions
It
all
is.
at once.
All right. So it started when I was thinking a lot about, for a long period of time, maybe 3 or 4 months, I was thinking a lot about the fact that we are so innately connected to this thing we call story. And we're so connected to it that we just take it for granted fully. Even though we're as media focused as we are and addicted to entertainment, we don't actually realize why. It's and there's the unhealthy side where you're just like dopamine and all that, but like why is entertainment entertaining? What is it in us that is so drawn to this thing called story? And then it started to unravel from there, and I realized, okay, well, everything's story. You know, all of our thoughts, how we process, how we make sense of the world, everything is in one shape or another a form of story. So I'm like, oh man, is this like breathing? Like we breathe every day, and we just take it fully for granted, but it's just so important. And maybe if we actually leveraged it or utilized it or leaned into the process of learning it and using it, you know, maybe that would really affect our life. And I was like, well, of course. we talk about a life story. What's your life story? And then it started to take shape. I'm like, people need a framework. And we'd already studied classic story frameworks, story structure, where you set up the normal world and then something happens. We call it an inciting incident. And then after that, that world can't be the same. And your hero starts to respond to the call. And you're saying, oh, okay, we're reacting to all these problems and like the stakes are raising. But really, that could be distilled down to a series of steps that people could actually use. And when I was reflecting on all the progress that I've made in my life and in business, my life in business as an entrepreneur here at Votary Films, it really started to take shape, this framework, this 7-step process, where if you could kind of take stock no matter where you are in that process and refocus yourself on this objective thing, like, oh, I am in a story. This is conflict. This is maybe the most important part of the story. Instead of just feeling the conflict in that moment, you can say, oh, I could be objective about this. This is going to be really important later on. And actually what I do right now is really important because it's affecting the story, and it's affecting the stories of everyone around me. So that's what led to writing this book, because I was like, I really want to, use this process for myself and with my team members. And I'm like, I'd remembered that someone said to me, you don't get clear on something and then write a book. You actually write the book, and that's the process of becoming clear on it. And that's really true. A lot of these things were floating around in my head, but until you go through the process of getting it all written out in front of you, it's not as clear to you as it becomes then. So the first point of writing the book, and I say this in the beginning of the book, was to use story acceleration in my life and in the business. Not coincidentally, when I decided to write the book, we had just started doing story acceleration as a service with our partners, our clients. And I was loosely talking about a process to take them through. And it works. The process was, we were starting to see fruit and evidence from it. But I realized that same process could be crystallized down to the individual level, like almost like self-help. Like, here, take yourself through this process, and that will affect your story. And the same thing happens in an entity, a business, as you're taking a business forward. So everything kind of just aligned. I wanted to have, on the personal level, this is like written to the entrepreneur, how to use story to advance your life and consequently your business too.
What did you learn from writing it? Because you're saying you get clarity. Was it just like clarifying your ideas and structuring it, or did you like come to like, new conclusions or aha moments while writing?
I mean, there's really aha moments in every chapter for me, because the book is this. The chapters are each chapter is one of the 7 steps, and what I do in the book is use story, of course, to illustrate the point that I'm making about that step. Like achievement, being achievement minded, like going after a goal. That's basically after the beginning. That's chapter 1. And as I reflected on all the stories that I felt were appropriate to put in the book, more and more aha moments did come up, where it's like you do float in and out of picturing the end goal, and that's natural. But the more that you picture the end goal and sort of bring it to the here and now steps, the more you realize you're creating like win-win opportunities along the way. And I'd have to probably tell a story to
like what's one that stands out the most? Like what was the
like aha moments you're saying throughout it?
Yeah, like an example of something you weren't really planning on maybe writing, that you learned maybe about yourself, or you learned just by kind of writing things out, right? Because like we all have like so many ideas and thoughts, and as soon as you sort of make it linear and like you're structuring it, it's like, I don't know, things come to light.
I think the biggest one out of the whole book, the one that stands out from you asking that, was in the chapter about conflict. I had read some statistics that like 90% of what we worry about doesn't come to pass.
Yeah.
So we worry about all these potential outcomes that, maybe we've done nothing and they still don't come to pass. But I was like, what's the worst things that could happen in life that would give us so much fear? And then if they really do happen, how are we impacted by that? And what immediately jumped in my mind was the drunk driving car accident that we were in when I was a kid. We were hit by a drunk driver, and it spun out our car. Almost the whole family except for one person was in the station wagon. And my brother and I, my older brother, were ejected from the car, and we went tumbling. And I was very, very little. I was like 3.5, and he was 5, I believe 5. And my dad came to and wrestled himself out of the car. Everyone was shocked and disoriented and trying to figure things out. And he remembered that we were napping in the back of the car, and he went looking for us. And he was able to pick me up and get me back into the car. But my brother was all broken. His head was all broken, and he was I'm sure he was dead already. And my dad goes through this whole thing, and the whole family goes through this whole thing. And I can't think of a more devastating form of conflict than losing a child. And it's not something I could have even imagined before having kids, because you just don't know what it's like to have kids until you have kids. There's part of you. And then the statistics of parents that stay together or get divorced, depending on which way you look at it, after losing one of their kids, I mean, the divorce rates are off the charts. It's very rare that two people stay together. And my parents did heal, and they did stay together. So it served as maybe the most, there's let me further that by saying they went on to be able to tell this story of healing to many people.
Yeah.
And it served as this amazing example of how the worst possible thing can happen to you, and you can heal and learn and grow from it.
Yeah. That's cool. Yeah, I mean, I haven't read this version, but I remember reading your kind of first draft and getting thoughts and notes, and that was my favorite part of the book. Probably because it was the most like raw and emotional and kind of dark, but also beautiful. Like how you describe your dad, like basically forgiving the driver and like being able to be like level-headed through that was like I like couldn't wrap my head around that.
Yeah, well, none of us could.
So intense.
It's completely a spiritual moment and a spiritual story. My dad told it to us a few times. He didn't like to talk about this incident. Who would?
Naturally.
But the times that he did, he made sure that he's focused on the important part of the story, and that was the important part, is that he had almost an out-of-body experience in that moment, and he's looking at this man who he knows he killed his son. And they're all in the ambulance together. It's one ambulance. Four of us. We're all in this ambulance together, rushing to the hospital. And he looks at this man, and something comes over him, and he feels this connection to a bigger story. And he feels this weight of the importance of the moment. And he feels some other force open his mouth, and then he gets this calm and this peace, and he decides to say, I don't know what you've done to my son, but I want you to know I forgive you. And
it's like right after it happened.
It's in the midst of it.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. And what's interesting about getting new details over time, and I talk about this in the book, and growing up, I thought that I heard him say, I don't know what's happened to my son, but I want you to know I forgive you. And these tiny little word differences matter so much, because I always had this feeling of like, that sounds kind of weak. Like, how could he forgive him that fast? This guy just killed his son, and he doesn't know yet, but no matter what happens, I forgive you. And I just had this idea. And then later on, my sister corrected me, and she said that he was looking at him it was very serious, of course. And he said, I don't know what you've done to my son, but I want you to know I forgive you. It was like...
It wasn't absolving him of the blame, or the fault.
And it just became so much more powerful to me. And this fed into the construct, the framework as well, because the framework is cyclical. Sometimes you get new details to the story, and it reframes how you grow and how you advance. And I was like struck by that. We do get new details, and we do need to. We need to. This is one of the great tensions in in life, is that we have to make a hypothesis enough to move forward, to take steps. You never want to be paralyzed. So we say, I think I understand what to do now, and I'm going to go forward. But you still have to hold on to it loosely enough so that later on you're not stuck in dogma, where when you get new details, you're not so entrenched to where you can't say, oh, I can learn something new from this and now move in a slightly altered direction. It changes my course just a little bit. And this is the cycle. This is the story, acceleration flywheel, is that you keep moving forward with what you've learned, and you keep learning new things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a cycle. There's not a beginning, middle, and end to what you're talking about. It's like it's a process of continuous learning and improvement. And I think we all get probably onto the treadmill of life of being like, well, once we get to this, or once we arrive, there's some arrival point that we think is everything's finally gonna be right. And that's in business just as much as any other part of life. Once we get all of our ducks in a row, or once we get all the right people, or once we get X amount of revenue, or whatever those goals are, it can be easy to get into the trap of being like, then we'll have done what we've set out to do as a business or whatever. And it's like, well,
then we can stop and retire.
Right. Yeah. So I think viewing it as, just like in business, just like in life, you're constantly evolving, constantly learning, growing, and getting better, hopefully, if you're doing things right, if you're learning from the journey. And that to me is what kind of speaks to that picture of the circle the most.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I don't know if it's because we know that there's a birth and we know there's a death, that it's in our mind, and we can only picture kind of a day or two at a time, that it does feel very like linear, start, finish. But you're right in that the better way to think of it is ongoing, even beyond your own life, right? Because everyone
or even after you retire.
After you retire. Like people that get toward the end of their life, their whole thought process shifts to what's going to live beyond me, right? And this is true, there's a lot of examples of how this has played out. For example, Louis Zamperini, you remember the Unbroken story? He would talk about the people that would die in concentration camp, and he said he could almost pick out the people. I believe this was him. It was either him or it was Viktor Frankl. I might be confusing them, but he said the people that would say, "Well, this will be over by Christmas. We'll be free by Christmas." They would be dead after Christmas, because they were giving themselves this linear timeline of like start and finish, instead of the long game. And it's sick to call that a game, but you get what I'm saying. Yeah. It's like everything you do has to be applicable in the moment and forever. It needs to be building for the forever. And that's actually one of the big points in this, is to really think in the longest sense of the longest game possible.
It's kind of funny that it's a book. Would you say the target audience is entrepreneurs?
Yes.
So it's interesting that we've gotten to the deepest depths of the human experience already, talking about this book that's geared towards entrepreneurs. But I think that speaks. I think that speaks to why you might want to read this book. Why it's a little bit different. It's not just how to make your business bigger and better and make more money. There's more to it than that. There's more depth.
Yeah, I would say anyone could probably find something beneficial, or at least interesting. And I mean, the idea is to apply it to your life. Everyone's got goals, right? Staying on like the conflict thing, I had a thought about Well, so is the, like with the example you said, like there is some sense of, I don't know about resolve, maybe inwardly resolve for you guys on some level, and even hope, and maybe even like, wow, you can come out on the other side of that and know you can weather something really tragic. Are you kind of saying through the 7 steps and with the book that when there is that sort of deep conflict or tragedy or something, is it always that there is always a possibility of that hope or resolve on the other end?
What I'm saying is don't be afraid, because we're afraid of what may happen. But if you just think of it differently, if you can somehow think of it differently and say, well, probably what I'm fearing won't happen. But let's just say the worst things that I'm imagining do happen. Well, that's going to mean that I grow. If I lean into it, if I develop character, and if I work at it, I grow to the point where that thing that happened allows me to go to whole new heights. And so there's really nothing to be afraid of. And when you can remove the fear, you can take massive action.
Yeah.
And have a much more epic story.
I would imagine this would be difficult for someone who's been through something similar or even more tragic, or something where it's just like, it's almost like the everything happens for a reason argument. I know you're not saying that necessarily, but it's like that's so hard to swallow for certain situations.
Listen, unresolved trauma is a real thing.
Yeah, it's like
unresolved trauma, that's where you feel paralyzed and you feel stuck. That part of the story hasn't been fixed. It hasn't. You haven't been able to grow from it, but it is possible.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it has to be, right? Like you hear, there's enough, and I guess that's part of the point. It's like there are enough stories of people who are just like what's that guy who like has literally no limbs, and he's like a
Vuvacek.
He's like a motivational speaker.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
It's like there's so many examples where it's just like, okay, well that seems like the worst it can get in one respect, and then somehow this guy has hope or whatever. But I mean I know for every example like that there are probably thousands of examples, if not more, of people who either they didn't find a way out of that, or I don't know. It's like it's hard to say. It's like, is there always something that you can basically climb your way out eventually?
Listen,
in some way.
I'm not saying that that tragedies don't exist, and that I know. And I mean that in the sense, in the story sense of the word. People do live out tragedies.
Yeah.
And it's it's tragic to me when people reject help, or when they feel so broken that the despair has taken over and they've spiraled down, and that process wasn't interrupted, and eventually they're dead. Those tragedies exist. We see it. Drug users that go from amazing potential to dead, right? I'm not saying that doesn't exist. I'm just saying that, I mean, it's the same is true on the other side. You can interrupt the process of going down.
Well, what you're describing, the framework or the process that you're kind of diving into in this book and exploring, it's not saying, here's the tools to achieve everything you ever wanted in life. It's saying, here's an understanding of some, honestly, like, call them fundamental truths. Right? Tap into this reality. And the example of the drug user is very much utilizing this process. He or she is in this process. They're just accelerating negatively.
Right.
So they're just telling themselves, they're telling a negative story, and they're not learning from the process, and it just compounds, and round they go until it's a spiral instead of a climb.
I've heard I've been listening to the Huberman Lab podcast. He's like a neurobiologist or something, and he has a quote, or he said something that struck me about you can't necessarily like fight your mind with your mind, but you can fight your mind with your body in the sense that of like using the example of like, say, working out to like better maybe your mental health or something, or just like some sort of, it's basically saying like some sort of action needs to be taken that sort of gets yourself out of your own way.
I subscribe to that. I mean, for the most part, I think it's the fastest way to change your physiological state is to move your body.
Yeah, it's
change
just
your thoughts.
Just sort of thinking like, staying with that sort of idea of momentum. It some sort of action has to happen, right? It's like you can't, if you stay stagnating, no matter what you're going through, it's just like you know the outcome. it just is
Right.
Just,
like
it's a emotional, mental, and then eventually literal death. It's like
but we do get to choose what stories to tell ourselves. I heard it described once that our mind, we only basically think in pictures and in words, and pictures are very hard to change, but words are relatively easy to change. And this is why self-talk is taught and stuff like say this, say your mantra, because you can put the right words in your head, and
people look in the mirror and say you are beautiful.
And when we do a lot of this without even thinking, subconsciously or barely conscious, like, oh, I'm terrible at math.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well,
I'm bad with names. I hear that
I'm bad
a
with
lot.
names. Well, you are telling yourself a story with that, and you are programming your mind with that story.
It's true. Yeah, and it's interesting because I think a lot of us have those habitually. Hold for voicemail.
Is that $1 million sale? Pick that one up.
Hi, I'm watching your podcast live stream, and it's like,
where can I get the book?
It's a what is a telethon?
I want to
It's a
fly. Are you teaching people how to fly?
The books are flying off the shelf now.
This has got to be revolutionary.
The lines are still open. You can still
that
call
picture on the
tonight.
cover, is that possible? Is there a book that size?
Now I'm interested in flying.
Now, is this book an actual flying apparatus, or is it just the kind of book you read?
So you're teaching me to build the apparatus, correct? There's blueprints inside the book named Fly. So by the end of this book, I'm going to fly, literally.
If I pedal hard enough, is that what you're?
All right, let's segue that into something useful. So, explain the origin of the name and why you landed there.
Yeah, I think a lot of us have dreamt of flying. Certainly, mankind would look at the birds and see them flying, and eventually we built machines that allow us to fly. And as a kid, one of my reoccurring dreams was that I could fly, and when I eventually could control it, my dreaming became amazing. Lucid dreaming, they call it, and I didn't know the term until later when I...
You were aware you were
I was aware I was
dreaming.
dreaming, and once I was aware I was dreaming, I could control the dream. And once in a while, it would get out of hand, like outside forces. I'd have to remind myself, hey, I can still control this,
Catherine
right?
Zeta-Jones. Oh, no, it's a monster.
No, but this was a very common thing. So flying has always been very near and dear to my heart. So what better analogy than the idea of taking flight? Something that seems very impossible to us as humans. We don't have wings, but what leaning into the process of story acceleration is what it does for us is it allows you to go to write a more epic life story. It allows you to go places you at first couldn't dream that you could go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Things that you didn't believe you could achieve later on become realized, and it's a gradual process. It's a step-by-step thing. Anyone who has gone down this journey to some degree knows that the things you dream of on day one, a few years later after working at it, they seem like small dreams later on, and your dreams become even bigger. Mm-hmm. You're like, because I can remember when I just would dream, hey, imagine if all my monthly bills were paid, and they were like auto paid out of the account, and there was just always enough money in there that I'm not talking about extravagant things, just the cell phone bill,
living
and the
costs,
food and living costs.
Once your
and that
basic
dream
needs are
was
met,
just like, imagine, right? And many, many, many people have that dream right now, and they can't leave their job.
Imagine
their
I
normal
had
job.
a meal every day, my basic needs. Yeah.
I think that's why, in my mind, the most important part of the process is the reflection process.
Right.
Because I think it's human nature to never be satisfied. Like we're never, it takes so much reflection and self-awareness and perspective to be content. And contentment is such like a practice.
Yeah.
Because you adapt. So we adapt so quickly to our circumstances.
Totally.
That things that, like what you're saying, that were once a dream become commonplace.
Right.
And we're just like, I deserve it. Right? I deserve everything I have.
Boring.
And, yeah. And like, and so it's a good thing and a bad thing. It's good that we're always striving for improvement, for greater heights and all of that. And that's what keeps human advancement as a race ever continuing and improving in technology. And the poverty line is never, is the amount of people living in poverty has decreased decade after decade, and food, all of that. So all of human advancement is because of, I think, that thing that's in us that just takes for granted where we're at and then wants the next thing. At the same time, it's also kind of like the root of all of our problems, because we don't realize what's good or where we've come from. So we don't appreciate where we're at. And, I think in business, it's so true. I think about our last couple of years, and oftentimes I find myself in the trap of thinking like, oh, we're just not where I want us to be yet. We're not quite, we need to get all these things done and we need to get to this next level. And then whenever I stop to think back a couple years and start to think, okay, but wait a second, what we're facing right now, our quote unquote problems and challenges that we're facing right now, were not even in the realm of thought 2 years ago.
Right.
The types of clients, the level of jobs, the amount of money that we're, it's just like all of it is on another level.
Yeah.
And then I also just think about our operations, how we do things, the quality of work. All of it has just continued on a steady incline improvement. And I think about all the steps along the way, and I'm like, wow, you know what? We have come so far in not that long of a time. It's just you got to think about it. You got to reflect on it,
Right,
to appreciate it, and
reflect and just be present too.
Yeah,
that's something that's like we're not. We have to literally like force ourselves into submission to just be like, just
in the
exist,
moment right
just
now.
exist now. And
Yeah.
be, thankfulness, whatever, reflection, but just existing in the now is something that's like so difficult. I feel like for all people. I don't know if it has been historically. It's probably more difficult now because you could literally just have flashing lights and colors and craziness in front of your face until you die and like always be stimulated.
I just got to get to this podcast though, so let's finish up what you're saying.
Let's move it up. Yeah. No.
What?
Sorry, I wasn't.
Hold on. Getting a call.
No, you're right. And the reflection process is actually living out the memories of it, which is a story.
It's where the learning happens.
And you connect to it emotionally. It reconnects you to it emotionally. And it's reconnecting to those memories emotionally, which allows you to have that appreciation, and which then translates into joy in the now. Because if you're like, oh, yeah, we did come from that to now, that's a reason to be joyful, right?
Mm-hmm. And a lot of the time it's we just want that distilled like lesson we learned or something, just to be like this split second thing, like, oh, I wish I could just go back and just because I know this now. But it's like,
if I knew then what I know now.
It's like that.
Well, that's true.
That part of the process. It's like, yeah, it's like, but it's also a paradox because it's like the very struggle in like whatever, in maybe bad choices or whatever that you learn from is the very reason that you even have that knowledge now.
Yeah.
And you, by reflecting, you accumulate those nuggets and you put them in your
nuggets.
You put those. Let me mix metaphors. You accumulate. You accumulate those nuggets of wisdom, and you put them in your tool
donut
belt.
box.
You put them in your tool belt.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Wow.
And so, by being intentional, by reflecting, by making sure you're not forgetting the lessons of the past, the next time you hit a bump in the road, you're going to be better prepared for it. It's not going to hurt as much. You're going to get over it more quickly.
Exactly.
And you're gonna be a carpenter with chicken nuggets in his pocket, and you'll reach that goal.
When you're driving that truck down the road and
Yeah.
you pick the fruit from the farm, you look at the stars and you think, what an ocean.
I mean, when you stare into the abyss too long, you become the abyss.
Embrace the nothingness, fly. What was the easiest? There has to be either a chapter or a section that was like that, just like you were in the flow. Like, what was the easiest chapter, or not easiest, but like the most like I'm channeling it. You know?
Yeah.
Whenever, I feel like you've experienced this in writing. At some point.
Hate to say it, but it is the conflict one. The conflict one came out early and came out very easily.
Yeah.
So it was a centerpiece because, look, we are emotional beings. I don't know what the percentage is, but they say some really high percentage of every little decision we make is based on our emotions.
Yeah.
When we're in conflict, we tend to just feel it. We tend to just feel the emotion.
Even if there's a
and
logical decision to make, you want to connect that logical decision to something that feels good somehow.
Yeah. And or be stuck or just be like, this sucks and I don't know what to do. And you're just like, you're reeling.
Yum, self-pity.
Yeah.
Yum.
You know, instead of being objective. and
Victim
saying,
mentality.
I mean, it is really powerful if if in the midst of the conflict you can say, "Oh, this story is going to be amazing once I get through this hard part," and that's not common.
It's interesting to try to treat your life that way because you don't want to like be like a lunatic thinking that you're inside of a movie and you're like, I know how to get this out of this one, you know, and like I'm in jail, but like it's only for 15 years, and I can just do one of those like 15 years later things. You know, in my story, and
I don't know. For me, it's more like you're thinking about what action you can take while in the conflict to get out of the conflict while you're in it. Like last night, I was watching the movies that made us on Netflix.
It's great,
and it is awesome. And I watched the Home Alone one.
Yep.
And of course, it went from and I think it was Universal had it, and they dropped it, and everyone was fired.
How about that sly little move they did?
Right. Covertly dropping the script over at Fox.
That's
genius.
So
and technically
savage.
Not going along with the rules because the film is supposed to be in turnaround before you do that.
Yeah, no, it's illegal.
So they drop the scripts. Fox becomes all excited about it. They have this backup plan, and they turn them right back. But they saw the writing on the wall, and they saw that they were going to get fired. And so in the midst of that conflict, some of them just take it and say, I guess that's it. We're packing up, boys. And some of them are thinking, we can take action. We can take action. And they're not necessarily thinking, how epic will this story be if and when we take action and get ourselves out of this? They're just thinking, I don't want to lose this thing. And so they take action. So inevitably it is that ultimately they saved it. They saved the day, right? So So the point is the commitment to solving the problem and in the midst of conflict and taking action to solve the problem. That's the thing. People get stuck. They get stuck instead of, and sometimes you do need to sit and think and be careful. I'm not saying just take mindless action, but sit, get objective, become clear, try to move the emotions aside, and then take action. But don't not take action, right? Mm-hmm. That's the key.
Yeah.
That's a Henry Ford quote. It's like, critical thinking without action just becomes a disease. It just rots. It's nothing. It rots away. Similar to the Home Alone story, like what made me think of some of my favorite things to watch like that are. I feel like sports are, especially team sports, are like a microcosm of all of life,
Totally.
right? Like it has everything. Mm-hmm. That's why it's so entertaining. And
debatable.
Oh, and shaping. If you're in it, it shapes you, shapes your worldview.
And so, Patriots, when they were in the Super Bowl against Atlanta, and they were down 28-3 in the third quarter, in history, something that would never have been overcome.
Right.
And NFL Films does all these like, they do amazing recaps and tell the story because they have players that are mic'd up on the field, and so they have all this amazing content, and they can like tell the story of a game from a different perspective. And so they did one of that game, of course. And when it was 28-3 in the third quarter, Julian Edelman started running around to all the players on his team and just kept saying, "It's gonna be an amazing story, guys. They're gonna tell an amazing story at the end of this." And he was literally saying story, like, this is going to be an incredible story.
This is the point.
And he was, whether he truly believed it or not, it almost didn't matter because he was rallying action. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like, and then he went and played out of his mind and did like amazing things in that game. And it was just so unbelievable. And I feel like it's just an example of like that, of what we're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. People could make the case that you're not truly believing it, like you just said, when you're thinking that way or when you're rallying people. That's not really the point. The point is, did you believe it enough to take those?
Right.
That
Did it lead to
action?
meaningful action?
Right.
Yeah.
Because that's maybe all it takes to tip.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's important to hear about those stories because, well, with like the movies that made us thing, like I was blown away by some of those episodes because you grew up with these movies just being classics and everyone knows them and everyone quotes them, and you just assume that whoever wrote this was just like, I'm writing gold, and whoever got a hold of that script is like, this is gonna be slamming, like, but no, it's like a struggle to get made, and they turn it down 50 times and all this stuff. Like, you hear that story over and over, even with things like Lord of the Rings, Home Alone. It's just like, people turn this down? What? And then you realize, oh yeah, it had like a bunch of different drafts and so many problems arose, and then they wanted to like back out of the funding or whatever. And
Yeah.
it's crazy to think of that with like these things that just almost seem like life couldn't exist without Back to the Future.
That's kind of
like,
true, though.
It's like without what would our existence be without Back to the Future? Like, come on.
Well, there'd be a rift in the space-time continuum.
Yeah, exactly.
I will say this: Home Alone, even though at the time, look at I remember my dad saying, "Oh, this is almost like a cartoon, but in live action."
They did that on purpose.
And I didn't. And my dad literally said that. And only last night did I hear them saying all their references were cartoons.
Yeah.
Like how the impacts and the crazy stunts and all.
I
this.
actually took it too literal when I was a kid. I remember watching it with my dad, especially the second one, because they go even more over the top.
Yeah.
When he's throwing bricks on his head.
I cringed at that too.
I remember being a kid and not laughing at all. And my dad's dying, and he's just
Yeah.
like, it's a movie, and I'm just
Yeah.
like, but wouldn't that like
Kill someone?
kill you? Like, I couldn't process that. Like, this is supposed to be
So
slapstick.
it's so funny you're telling that part of the story because that was the exact opposite with me and my dad in that scene. I was like laughing and being like,
and your dad
and my
was
dad was
more
like,
literal.
that would actually kill someone, son.
Yeah.
Just so you guys know. Like, he's probably picturing
go
us up
throwing-
on the roof
Yeah.
doing
Right.
it.
This is called-
He's like, just so you guys know, that would actually kill someone.
That's
if
called
that
blunt
happened.
force trauma, and it would be deadly.
I love all the stuff with Joe Pesci, and my dad literally looks like Joe Pesci. And
does.
So like, it's like that movie's extra funny to me because I feel like my dad's laughing at himself in the movie, but he's also like my dad. I think when I was a kid, I think he would like try to like contain his swears or like expletives or anything if he was upset, and he still does to a degree. I'm like, I'm a grown man. It's funny. Like, oh shoot. And I love hearing the Joe Pesci thing about how the only scripts that he would not add swears to would be like Martin Scorsese scripts, but this was a kid's movie.
Yes.
And so he just does the
Yeah.
like thing. And it makes no sense.
They
It's
also
such a
had-
cartoony thing.
They also had some outtakes where he was inserting some of those words, and he had to just like keep like pulling it out.
He's like, oh, sorry. Yeah.
Just angry sound. It was the first two letters of
most-
every swear in the world.
It's the most nonsense thing. Yeah.
It's when you say that, it's so funny because as a kid, I'm like, oh, this guy's mad. Like,
Yeah, I didn't overthink it at all when I was a kid.
yeah.
Last night, I've been in the mode of trying to find deeper influence from the things that I've watched growing up, and that movie Home Alone I have a greater appreciation for it, partly because of how good that show was, like breaking it down, showing the behind the scenes and all that. But it also was reminding me of what it did for me as a kid. I think I was actually genuinely positively impacted by watching this 8-year-old take control of his life without any adults and like put one foot in front of the other and do things and go get the groceries and go. Like, there was subtleties to that actually affected me as a kid in a positive way.
It's a good coming of age
really
story.
is.
It's
What's the scene that kind of the turning point where he decides to own the fight? Doesn't he do some self-talk?
He does.
Isn't he
He's like,
my name is Kevin.
and this is my house.
this
Yeah.
is my house. I must defend it.
What led to
He
that?
had another line too, like, this is it. Don't get scared now.
Was there a moment of turning there? I can't remember.
Oh, yeah, because he was afraid of the furnace, and then eventually told it to shut up.
Shut up.
Yeah, that was a turning point for sure.
Oh yeah. Facing your fears. I mean, he was kind of like
That was a midpoint,
wimp.
actually.
In the beginning, like everyone's yelling at him, but you're like, well, he is kind of annoying. You know,
Oh,
but
yeah.
as a kid, you're like, well, this is the person I'm supposed to identify with. And you're kind of used to walking into rooms and like saying the wrong thing or whatever. It's like, oh, this is the adult time. Like I remember the feeling of like, oh, I guess when I'm older, I'll just want to sit around and be boring. Like, because that's what I thought of adults. I just walk into a room and be like, ugh, how can you guys just sit still and just talk? Like, but I remember being kind of like you could just go play with your Legos or whatever. I'm like, I will. You know, I remember what that felt like. And so you get to kind of watch that as a kid and identify with that and then be like, well, what would it be like
I love
by
how
yourself?
He has a genuinely mean, like a verbally abusive uncle.
Yeah.
Look what you did, you little jerk.
Oh, you're cooking, Frank.
Classic.
So
You little pervert. Yeah, that was a good one. That's more the second one, I think, right? Yeah, that's Home Alone 2. Anyway, yeah. Home Alone.
Life
a
lessons.
classic.
Life lessons from Home Alone.
So go buy Home Alone.
read this book. So how do we tie it back into this book?
Well, what's your so?
What was the hardest
Is every single? That's a good question. Yeah.
Because we just did what was the easiest part to write? What was the part that was like writer's block wasn't coming out?
I think, and I've experienced this with writing scripts, feature scripts. I heard someone call it the marathon of the middle, where like you have the framework and you have a good beginning, you have some good key points, but there is a middle section where it's tough to make the middle as entertaining as and engaging is really the word.
So you knew kind of how you wanted to end it?
I actually didn't know how I wanted to end it until I was halfway through writing the book.
Okay.
And then I knew I did some rearranging and decided to tell the story of how I got out of an identity. I don't want to say I got out of it. The circumstances led me to, thankfully, get out of an identity crisis that I had. Was able to get a new identity. But there was a period of time that I felt like I was in prison with an identity that was actually too limited. And at the time, I didn't see it that way. So it's all in the book. I don't want to go too hard into it, but only when I realized I could rearrange the book and say, okay, this story really belongs at the end because it's the thing that allowed me to really move forward in career. And it tied together with some other stories. So yeah, it was in the middle. If you're asking me the most difficult part, it was just finding ways to thread the middle.
Like what steps or what's right in the middle story wise? Like,
Ooh,
There's like 30 blank pages right in the middle of the book.
it's the middle.
and feel free to take notes. There's just like
All work and no play makes Jed a dull boy.
Going from developing character into thinking authentically. You inevitably want to make each chapter have a similar duration, a similar amount of weight. But some of these steps, as important as they are, there is actually a little less to say about them. I mean, you illustrate them enough and people get it. So I don't want there to be fluff. So when I'm saying the middle, I'm saying figuring out what lands and what's enough, and not having fluff, like
Sure.
not just writing for writing's sake. Yeah.
Is the very accomplishment or act of finishing a book, does that qualify as one of those things that, you know, at a certain point in the past you would have thought of like an unattainable goal or something that wasn't?
Yeah. Yeah, 2 years ago. I mean, I set the goal to write the book 3 years ago. And at that time, I knew I could do it because I had written some scripts. And I was like, oh, writing is like, it seems crazy until you get into it and it starts to find itself, you find your way through it. So I knew that was possible, but it was so different than it's nonfiction. For me, a story has always been fiction, and I can just dream and go. And this is like I'm teaching, and that felt like impossible to me. And so, yes, finishing it is something that is like a big milestone. I never wanted to write a book, by the way. I had never had any desire to write books back before. It was the decision to figure out how to give away things that I've learned that even gave me the desire to write it.
Are there things, and maybe it's just more books, but are there things that having accomplished this goal that now feel more obtainable than they did before?
100%. By the end of writing this, my vision for my life story grew, I don't know, tenfold. And it's so crazy that in the beginning of the book, I was like, I'm writing this for me as much as I'm writing this for you. And by the end of it, I was like, I had ideas that were coming that were like impossible for me to imagine before. And now I'm like, it's totally possible.
Mm-hmm.
It's totally possible.
Are any of those ideas more books, perhaps?
I think I do want to write some fiction. I don't know when. That might be later on. I'm more interested in movies in the more near to midterm than. So I'll probably take a little bit of time. I'm more interested in writing more scripts in the next run rather than a book. But I think I think some stories want to be novels more so than scripts. Even though I think visually and think like, oh, the movie, I also like the idea of going through an exercise of just letting the characters go into interesting places. And I'll still outline and have a structure and all that, but I feel like some stories want to be novels, and I've never done that before, so at some point I will. But no, the vision that was unlocked by the end of writing this book was much more business related and family. I never really hardly thought much about having sort of a family mission. Like I thought about raising great kids and releasing them into the wild, but never really thought about the fact that our family unit will always be our family unit, and we actually could be united and aligned on some family mission for the rest of my life. And so that's one thing, and then a bunch of really big audacious goals in business, which some of you guys already know.
I was thinking,
do you need to clean up?
no, it's just fine. I spilled for those listening. I spilled my Polar Seltzer. Shout out to Polar Seltzer.
Cranberry lime.
Yeah,
This episode sponsored by.
Sponsored by Polar Seltzer.
I spilled a little puddle in front of me on the glass tabletop here, and it's kind of got like a Mickey Mouse, like a distorted Mickey Mouse shape.
Oh, Polar Disney team up.
Oh, thank you,
Let's
Fallon.
let's tag
Yeah, that's trademarked. You're gonna
tag the
need to,
Crowleys and get on that.
It-
Sensing some vision.
if you could, like,
Thank you, Fallon.
hope for any one point to come to like really hit home with people in the book, what would that be?
It would be the intentional reduction of the three villains that I go through in the book. The three villains. Let me just go to it.
Laziness, fear,
Ooh,
and distraction.
you nailed it.
Nice.
You must have just read it.
No,
Oh,
steel trap.
wow. Laziness, fear, and distraction. I describe them as three villains, and they really are villains. They're always trying to pull us away from our achieving the most epic life story possible. So the thing that I really want people to get is that there are tools, there are ways of fighting off laziness, fear, and distraction. And the biggest one of all those is fear. Like, he's the master villain. He's the arch enemy. Fear is that thing, and it's always lurking. And it's lurking in different shapes and forms in the back of our mind. Like, what will people think of me? Will it not work out? Is it going to be painful? Is all of that. It's all fear.
Yeah,
so
I think people don't like to assume that, like, oh, I'm afraid to do something or whatever. Like, they would probably never, like, if you were to just be like, what are you afraid
what are you
to
afraid
do
of?
this?
Yeah.
Like
I'm not afraid.
Yeah, like, people don't, I don't think, walk around believing that.
Fear has
time,
many
there's
subtle shapes.
Right. There's like stacks of things on top. Like, well,
Doubt,
maybe you're not believing in
shame,
yourself because
right.
because of all these other things, or you lie to yourself and say, well, no, I'm fine where I'm at.
Right.
No, I'm good. And it's like, well, you're doing that so you can be comfortable, so you don't actually have to face
because you're
the
in
fact.
cover. You
It's
haven't
so
broken
much
from cover.
And oftentimes, like, kids do this all the time in school and stuff. Like, kids who don't have good role models, who don't therefore believe in their ability or capacity to do anything, a common decision is to self-sabotage.
Definitely.
That takes away the excuse of it's better to just screw myself over and therefore have an obvious out for why I didn't accomplish something than to try and fail.
Funny story about that. I had a really good friend when I was young, in my 20s, and he and I and another couple people made the first film that was ever commercially released, and it's a documentary, and it's called Swallow Your Pride. I was very loosely involved. I was like an associate producer, and it's a documentary about competitive eating. You can look it up and watch it on Amazon or something. But it actually was sold through Cinetic Media in New York City, and it was like a cool documentary. And he had it all on this hard drive, and we kept saying, when's this thing going to be done? Like, we got to get this out there. And he was editing it and working on it, and it takes a long time to get across the finish line and get to the place where you're like, all right, I'm ready to go show people on this. And it really was a marathon, and he was kind of alone in it because he was really the only editor. We weren't ready to. He was, we can't just jump in and finish it for him, right? And so he's working hard on it. And one day he goes, I just am so tired. He's like, I just, like, sometimes I wish that the hard drive would just burn up and then it would be chosen for me.
Yeah, right. It's out of my hands.
It was out of my hands. It was an out of my hands thing. And I remember hearing that and just thinking, is that a real thought? Are you really having the thought that this one hard... And in that moment, I was like, do we have it on any other hard drives? Like, is this anywhere else?
Backed
like,
up,
yeah,
right?
this is backed up, right? He's like, oh, it's all right here. It's on this hard drive. I don't know how it didn't get toast. Eventually, I think it was put on other hard drives. But anyways...
He's like staying up.
It really was telling...
dragging it to trash. And he's just like
hovering
over
a lighter
like
underneath
empty
it,
trash.
Or he's leaving the hard drive in like really precarious situations.
just bumping it randomly.
Just like on the edge of the
He's
table.
spreading like mayo in a sandwich, just spreads it on the hard drive. Like,
it's out of my hands.
But trying to set up other people to knock it off
that's
the
so
table.
disturbing.
But
that
it
he
was
even didn't have it backed up.
disturbing that even the thought would manifest and it could come out as words. And I was like, that is so true. Like, we tend to think that might alleviate me from this pressure that I'm feeling, this pain that I'm feeling right now, of the finishing pain, is if something was out of my hands and it just happened. And it's so strong that we can actually wish for it.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is what you're sort of pitching in the book about, fear or distraction or laziness, but I found that people waiting for their fear to subside is the problem. I think fear is inevitable.
Such a good point.
I think I don't forget who said this. Maybe it was Jordan Peterson. But just talking about how you'll by just pushing through that and taking action anyway, obviously within reason, or not just anything you're afraid to do, like things that might be more irrational fears or things that are keep holding you back. It's like you just become more brave. You don't get less afraid.
That's right.
And it's like, that's such a good point. And anytime you're waiting for that sort of fear to subside that's when you stagnate.
I will say that over a long enough time scale, with enough stories stacked up in your heart, you do have a greater defense from fear coming in. Yeah. I'm less afraid now against anything than I used to be.
But part of that is the stories of choices you've made.
Oh, this absolutely wouldn't be the case if there wasn't courage to face of those fears over those stories that I'm referring to.
Yeah.
It's just programmed my mind and my heart to say, no, everything's gonna be fine.
Yeah.
Everything's gonna be fine. Yeah, and it's just like it's this calm that's in the background. Now, could it be shaken up? Of course, it could be shaken up. I have moments where one bad thing happens, I'm fine. 2 bad things happen, I'm fine. 3 bad things happen, I'm like, okay, what's going on? 4 bad things happen all at once. I'm saying,
Right.
and then on the 4th or 5th thing, I'm like, what the crap is going on? We need. So there is definitely a threshold, right? But again, it shouldn't stop us from taking action, having courage, going after each one. One of the things I say to my boys is like, when conflict comes, don't sit there and try to figure out like, what's the no, run toward it. Run toward it. You need to make a phone call, make that phone call. You need to get up and walk around to think first for a second, that's fine. But run toward it. Whatever you're doing, don't be satisfied until you've gone toward that conflict. Not away from it, toward it.
Yeah.
And that's the key, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the 3 villains, can't think, I've been actually trying to think of like an example or a story that I know of like, where, you know, succumbing to fear, laziness, or distraction made all the difference. You know what I mean? Like that was the solution. It's like, it's just impossible.
No, yeah.
I think, well, I think there would probably be arguments nowadays where, I don't know, like someone could make the argument of laziness is just like, you just really just needed you time for yourself because you love yourself. And if you need to just like be lazy, you do it. You'd go do it. Like, I feel like there could definitely, maybe people wouldn't say.
That's like mislabeling, right?
If the argument is that
they wouldn't say like, just be lazy, you earned it or something. But I feel like you could print that on a T-shirt and people would wear it.
Just be lazy, you earned it.
Just be lazy, you earned it.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good T-shirt.
See?
Well, I would say rest.
Sure,
is
sure.
so
That's
important
different. That's different.
for the purposes of
Rest
being able,
every night from 6 to 10 p.m.
I mean, life is very nuanced, and the difference between truth and untruth sometimes is very, like, that's the case here. With a slight tweak, it's not that way, and that is the case. But I would say, you know, that's not how I'm defining laziness. You know,
Right.
Rest, and I actually make a big point in the chapter of action that acting too quickly, like a knee-jerk reaction, can be devastating. You actually do need to take time to really think and plan. And I'm not suggesting that you should always be reactionary. I'm saying that
That's different.
It's very different. In fact, the whole framework works against that. The idea of being reflective and authentic means that you learned the moral and then applied to the advancement, right? So you have to go through every step in the process, which naturally slows you down and takes stock and figures things out before you take action. But don't not take action.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's sometimes, I mean, I'm trying to think about from a perspective of someone who maybe, obviously this is geared towards entrepreneurs, but maybe anyone could
Anyone
read
can
it.
use it. Anyone can
But
read it.
like someone who just, they don't even really, they can't get clear on their goals, you know? Like, I feel like I was that person for a while where I didn't know which goal I really had, that I had like clarity or what I wanted bad enough to go after, you know?
What age did piano is what you took first?
Piano is the only thing I took lessons for.
Okay.
For
At what age?
music.
What age did piano, or maybe it was early on, did piano become less? My parents are telling me to do this, and now I love it.
Well, actually, I was already doing it, and that's when I was encouraged to take lessons, and then I liked taking lessons, and then I remember I was 18, you know, was given a really hard recital piece, and it's just like, I'm like 18, I just want to hang out with my friends. I don't want to practice piano like hours a day, and in order to get to the you know, the level I would need to for this recital piece. And my teacher kind of gave me it a little late. You know, she kind of switched the recital piece on me to challenge me, and I quit.
Yeah.
I didn't even quit. I had my mom talk to her because I couldn't even face her because I was so ashamed, and she didn't want to see me. My mom came back out, and I was like, I should go talk to her, right? And she's like, she says she doesn't even want to see you.
Oof.
It was like and we were like friends. Like I was like close with her. Like we paid for a half-hour lesson because that's like what initially started. And years went by, she was charging like double what she had charged before, and I would have like an hour and a half lesson. Like she just liked having me, and I like looked her up years later, and I was like, it was this like older lady. I don't know if she like, she's probably been long dead at this point, but I remember thinking back like, wow, I never like resolved that. And it was probably when I was like 21, so maybe like 3 years later, that I started recording piano albums just on my own because I loved it. And yeah, I don't know. So that it was like within the small chunk of time, it's like I was like too cool for a piano. Like I got into like guitar and everything else.
That's an example of someone giving you an achievement that you didn't have. And that was your point, that you were saying you didn't really know what you wanted to achieve.
Well, yeah, I didn't see the like the magic it really had in my life. Like that was hugely important, and I just didn't see it that way at that time. It's like when you're a teenager and you're just like, I mean, I don't know if it was probably a little bit of all the all the three evils,
Right?
But yeah, I realized later, like, oh, without her name was Miss Egan. I was like, without Miss Egan, like I probably wouldn't be as inclined towards. I mean, I was always like drawn towards music, but I probably wouldn't have like the knack for it, or I don't know.
Hopefully, she learned to not be so petty and vindictive.
Can we get Miss Egan on the show? Someone look up Miss Egan, get her on.
She gave an 18-year-old the friggin' cold shoulder.
Yeah, she did.
That's rough.
Mm-hmm.
Well, but I mean, it was crappy timing on my part, and I was like, yeah, I don't know. I couldn't handle like the amount of work that I would have to do.
You want to hear my recital story?
Sure.
I hated piano, and I was forced into it for 5 years. And on the 5th year, I had finally, after 4 piano teachers that I burned through, the 5th was this guy who said, "What do you want to learn? What do you like to do?" And I was like, "Well, I like composing." And I was used to people forcing me to practice stuff.
Sure.
And he said, "So just write music. Go ahead." And I was like, "Really?" And he's like, "Yeah." And I just started making stuff up. And he's like, "Oh, what if you did this?" And he started like writing along with me. And it was so engaging, and I loved it so much that he literally gave me 80% of my time to just compose. And where I was going off with bad techniques, he would just help correct me a little bit. And I was so engaged and so ready from that flip to go on with piano. And then he moved away. He moved to South America.
Jeez.
And I was like, I gave up piano. But
this
is what I was going to say. This is what I was going to say by the end. But the end. So the 4th piano teacher before that situation, the 4th piano teacher, she gave me a recital piece similar to this. Just brought me back. You talking about it. And I said, "No, I'm not doing it." She's like, "Well, you have to do something at the recital. We have multiple kids coming together. We're doing this recital." I was like, "All right, I'm doing chopsticks." Plum, 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 plum. And she's like, "Really? That's what you choose?" I'm like, "That's my choice." She's like, "Whatever." I did chopsticks at the recital.
How old were you?
13.
Okay, yeah. But it was below your skills.
Yes, I knew enough piano to where I should have been something else. And one of my friends who was actually better than me in piano in the audience, because there was an actual audience that I did chopsticks in front of. He said afterwards, he came to me, he goes, "Jed, chopsticks?" And I said, "Yeah, I didn't want to do it." And he's like, "Really, chopsticks?" He just couldn't. It blew his mind. And
well, because
I needed that. I needed that.
Sound good.
No, and I actually needed him to give me this mirror of like ridiculousness for me to realize that my FU didn't land.
Mm.
Yeah. Well, I relate to. I mean, that's what I found on the other end was I'm never gonna be the cover band guy. No, I don't know that song that you like. No, I'm not going to learn it and play it for you. Like, if I'm the guy in the corner playing guitar, don't come over and ask me to, like I
Right.
realize like what kind of musician and artist that I am. I'm not the, I'm not gonna, I just want to write stuff. I just want to create. That's what I love about music is it's so purely creative. Like creating a film or the only process you get is the writing, which is still so much work and takes so much time that you get to just like be in the moment. Like creating a painting or a song, it just is, you're just there with it. And sometimes it's gone and it's gone forever and it doesn't matter because it gave you so much life in that moment. And that's when I realized when I was like in my maybe like 20 or 21 when I started writing more stuff on piano, like, oh, this is what I enjoyed. This is why I took lessons in the first place. But I had some more skill now because it was like I learned some hard stuff. But I was like, why did I lose joy for it? Like I look back, I still have my practice sheets, and I got lectured every single week by my teacher. She also would be very impressed, so I would feel like good about myself. So the criticism didn't land because she would be like, really, you only practice an hour, 30 minutes on this day and 30 minutes on this other day, the whole week? And this happened every week. The most I would practice would be like, 2 hours for the whole week. But I would still improve in that time. Like I was still playing, and I would just be like, "Can you just play this?" And I would just watch her, because I still was too lazy to like sit down and try to like read music and play it slowly. I wanted to hear it all, how it all fell together, and watch her hands. I'm like, okay, I got it. And then eventually she realized she's enabling me.
Yeah.
Because I'm not actually like
I shouldn't want to lose a job.
I'm improving and I'm pushing myself, but in the way that I knew how, which is by ear and watching. And I was way more comfortable. And still to this day, like I barely can read music, and I took lessons for
Me
like
too.
years.
No, me too. I can't.
Because I just
can
didn't. I
barely
didn't
read
work at it. I didn't look. All these like circles and dots and lines. I'm just like, I don't care. Like I'd rather just. I want to know what it sounds like and then practice that way.
Yeah,
I
I think we were similar. Our experience. Something you said just now was really interesting. You were talking about writing music, and you were just really present with it, and it had value in the there and now, or the here and now.
Yeah, it's so pure in the moment. It's like watering a plant and it just goes and just grows. Right away.
I've experienced hundreds of those times, and have always felt a sense of loss when I couldn't keep it and it was gone.
Yeah.
And that's a really cool perspective that you have about it being valuable just in the moment for me or for you, whoever the musician is, because and it actually says something about myself, because the thing that I was grieving when I was gone and I couldn't keep it, and it was like I couldn't write it down fast enough or record it fast enough or whatever it was just gone. It wasn't for me. I realized that I wanted to show others.
Yeah.
And it would, it's like I was losing this opportunity to, bolster my people's opinion of me. And it could be, a more pure version of that is just, hey, here's this beautiful thing, share it with the world.
Yeah.
But I think for me, and this is why music actually eventually started falling off for me.
Yeah.
And I still love it, but it's just not part of my career other than maybe like music edits here and there. And I haven't edited film or video for a long time, but
yeah,
it's crazy because it was like, how much of this tool can I use to get people to like me, and eventually, so it's something I've learned about myself.
There's a balance there too. I mean, I definitely say like it's highly personal and it always will be. And I think I realized the last couple of years like this is gonna just be a huge part of my life. Because I was wondering if it was going to start falling off for me too, but I realized it's super personal. But I've reached the point where it's like, oh, okay, I want to share it.
Yeah,
I love just jamming in my room and whatever, and like practicing and all that stuff. But yeah, it's like there's a lot of things that I'm gonna share in the next coming years.
I guess the point I was making was it's a very close cousin between the pure version, wanting to share it. Here's this beautiful thing you want to share with the world, and then just the fly in the ointment is like, I want people to like me.
Yeah.
From doing that. And I just think that journey is, you have to be very intentional about, that fork in the road, that path.
Well, I think that's where like art goes to die, is that place of like thinking about the feedback before.
Ugh.
You know what I mean? It's like,
I sure do.
Directors. It's like maybe it's why they say the second novel is like the writer's hardest to write or something. Like or the second film or anything. It's like you've gotten feedback now. And are you going to create from a pure place? Are you going to do it for yourself, or are you going to do it based on the feedback? And that's tough. And it's like, how do you not think about that?
Right, because the first time is just you.
It's a total risk.
Doing something. And then now you have all this new information.
You have something to lose.
And that I can't imagine it's going to be really hard to not let that infect the process. Good and bad.
I think about this with bands I like. It's like, why does everyone always talk about like, the old stuff? You know, it's like, is it just that you had more of an emotional response, or is it that they got lazy? It's like there are so many bands that like they're in the start of their career. For me, in my opinion, like it's just like, it's just slamming, and then it just starts to kind of just repeat like the same thing.
Also, it's so
whatever.
hard to
3 villains.
There's probably truth to it.
Probably true.
There's probably truth to it there's definitely truth to it that as there becomes other influences and motivations and things that are now being applied to the creative process of the band or the writer or the filmmaker, whatever. But also, I feel like the worst thing that an artist can do to him or herself is to come out too strong. Like, to come out with something that's so freaking good first time.
They outdid themselves.
Yeah, like, I see it happen with TV shows all the time. You watch a season of something and you're like, this is new, this is crazy, it's blowing my mind. And then it just creates this unrealistic expectation for it to do it. It could never do it again. Even if it's as good quality and everything, you experience that first time once. And so now you come out too hot. You come out with something so good that you're held to that original impression and the standard that it set. And it's just like, you'll never live up to it in the same way. That's why I think when there's artists and creatives who just endure and like are still making amazing things or reinventing themselves or coming up with new stuff, like those people are impressive.
Well, you got to remember what made it good. It's like people forget what makes something entertaining or what made it work. This is a stupid example, and I don't know if we should keep going.
No, we should wrap, but keep going.
All right, this is a really stupid example. I've been watching the Monsters, Inc. show on Disney Plus, which obviously initially I'm just like,
what are you, a baby?
Yeah, basically.
You're like a baby boy.
I like watching kids movies, and I love Monsters Inc. I love the original, the first one, Monsters University, unnecessary. And I'm watching the show, and it's a sequel of the show, and a lot of aspects of it are new and interesting because it's like, they're doing like the laugh, the laugh charge instead of the screams or whatever. I don't know if you guys seen it.
Yeah.
You've seen Monsters Inc. And you remember the Abominable Snowman?
Yes.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Himalayas.
You remember the joke with the snow cones?
Yes.
Don't worry, it's lemon. It says yellow snow.
Yeah.
And like, that's funny. It's moderately funny. So
'Cause it
that worked, right?
It's supposed to be pee.
Because of the P.
Right, because it's not pea, it's lemon. That worked, and in the show now, the episode I just watched, they go and they reintroduce that character, and they basically figure out, why was he banished in the first place? And then they figure out that, he was like banished under false pretenses, and they get him back. And what does he do when he's there? He becomes the snow cone salesman in the place. And I remember I just watched this and I just started laughing. I'm like, they totally just didn't realize what made this character good. Like, they just took the only thing that worked and they basically made it like, these are the only two things this character can do, is be kind of goofy, fluffy, and he's got snow cones.
Are you saying there wasn't enough, like they couldn't create new?
They just had
because
no
they went
new
off
ideas
of,
because all they did was just try to repeat the same exact thing, and just be like, and it's just like this,
instead of taking the risk of introducing the character points that could be new.
Right, like what was the Abominable Snowman's relationship with his father?
Anything, dude. Like, just what made the first one good is it had all these different layers, and the idea itself was so interesting and fresh.
What made him abominable?
I think what you're referring to is risk, because in the beginning, it's all risk, and all of life is the wave of risk and reward all the time, and
then once you have reward, they're like, We want a little more reward with no risk,
I'll take a reward with a side of reward.
Yeah. Sprinkle a little extra reward on top of that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Because, I mean, they're not risking anything at this point. Disney, at this point, risks nothing. They're just slapping
Not
all
just
kinds
Disney,
of stuff out there.
the whole Hollywood system. There is nothing
But Disney
new.
especially, because they're, like, I pay for Disney Plus. Like, why do I do it? I barely watch it, and I pay for it, and I'm like, because it's small enough that it's like they got you. And I'm like, wow, I could watch, I could watch the original Mulan anytime I want. It's pretty cool.
The most surefire way to get anything made is if it's already been made. Like,
yeah,
totally. Reboots, sequels.
But it's funny because I was actually liking the show for what it was, because it was kind of standing on its own up until then. And then that just made me. It wasn't like I was like, well, screw this whole thing now. But it struck me as funny. I was like, this is like a small little detail that I'm noticing, but it's just funny that like they made that 2-dimensional. It's like, well, it's a snow cone thing.
Like, what bugs me about the
just
reboots
really milk that
is that they'll do it for brands and franchises, like big titles that you know of, but then not with history, like stories from history. It's like, if the argument is like, will people come see this because if it's brand new, they've never heard of it before, but well, how about the stuff from history that should be told, and people do know something about it? Mm-hmm. They might come out. Just do it right. Do it well. I mean, sometimes they do. Like the Harriet Tubman thing wasn't bad. There's a little bit of creative license there. But then sometimes you'll find something that was like, all right, they finally took a risk with that.
Yeah, what's been a good historical film that's come out that...
There's been a couple Lincoln ones that were good. The John Adams HBO thing was really good.
That Amazing Grace was a really good movie.
What's that one?
It's about the abolition of slavery in the UK and the writing of the song Amazing Grace.
Oh wow, no, I haven't seen that.
Oh, it's really good. It's really, really good. I forget the guy's name, but he was pivotal he was involved in the slave trade. He profited from it. And I hope I'm not misquoting anything. Sorry if I am, but he grew conscious, became aware of the travesty that he was a part of, and then began to fight tooth and nail and legislate in the legislature to.
How do you go from that extreme all the way to the other?
That's Amazing Grace. Grace.
Yeah.
Through grace, you know, like through the transformational power of grace, and that's the inception of the. And I want to find out who made that movie, and then I want them to make the same type of movie about the story of the writing and the life of the man who wrote It Is Well, the hymn It Is Well. Because I don't remember the exact details of that story, but
Horatio Spafford, right?
That sounds right, and
it's in the book.
Is it? Okay, I haven't gotten there yet.
Get to.
So his wife and child drowned at sea, and then he wrote that hymn in the midst of that.
Yes, I believe if I'm remembering it right, it's 3 daughters and a wife. And by the way, in the book I tell a little bit more about it. He had already experienced ruin before that. He was a wealthy businessman in Chicago, and in the Chicago fires, he lost everything. That's part of the reason why they were going overseas. So he lost everything financially and then lost his family except for his wife. Sorry, not his wife, except for his wife. That's an infamous telegram that came from her. Saved alone.
That's right.
He lost his 3 daughters. And when he was crossing to meet with his wife, and they crossed that spot, he had this piece that came over him, and he wrote.
Got to make that movie.
Yeah. What leads up to that? I mean, that's a third act. Like, what leads up to that would be the story nobody knows through Chicago and losing everything. He built this whole business and was lost.
Well, maybe we should make a historical film.
Well, let's wrap. You got any parting words as it relates to the book? Maybe just where people can get it, find it.
Yeah, it's on Amazon, and I'm going to probably read the Audible version in the coming weeks. So there'll be all formats available right now. It's ebook and paperback. Hardcover versions you get here at Votary.
Link here.
Can you read the title and subtitle in what will be your Audible voice, like a little?
It'll be my real voice, so I'll do it, okay? The book is Fly. Take your business to new heights using 7 powerful steps of story acceleration.
That was a little enhanced.
Yeah, your voice changed. So
Enhance.
All right. Well, if you want more of that, stay tuned. And
what are the 7 powerful steps?
Okay, might as well say them. Might as well
Before we
say
wrap, I mean,
'em.
come on.
All right.
we don't want them to find out.
Okay, this is the
gotta
story
buy the
acceleration flywheel. Everything centers around step number 1, visualize achievement. If you want to achieve something, you picture it. The next step is take action. You can't take action and not have to navigate conflict, which is step 3, navigate conflict. Because of the conflict, you must develop character. It's how we respond to the conflict. What do we do with the conflict? And then that's the first half of writing the story. And then the second half of the power of story is telling the story. So now as we think back, now we are in the reflect stage, we think authentically. You have to think authentically. You have to set yourself up to think authentically in order to find the moral, which is step 5. 6, find the moral.
Oh.
So step 5, think authentically. Step 6, find the moral. And then step 7, advance. You take what you've learned. You found the moral. And this is how you can actually accelerate around the next revolution of the flywheel. You take what you've learned and you apply it. And part of that is actually practical too. When you're deciding, and you'll see this towards the end of the book, when you decide who needs to hear this story, how should this story be told? Sometimes it's just personal, you and me.
Yeah.
Sometimes it needs to be written down. Sometimes it needs to be a film. Sometimes it needs to be a story that's told to your entire team or something, or written down or blogged or whatever. But it's the how and when and all of that is wrapped into the practical part of the advanced step, which is step 7. And so really, those are the 7 steps.
Nice.
And if you want more of that, read the book. Goodbye.